Jasmine Washington stands frozen at the first-class gate, tears streaming down her face as the white gate agent smugly denies her entry. "Nice try with the fake ticket," he sneers. Little does he know, Captain Olivia Washington is watching everything from the jetway. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever been underestimated, and subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. Now, let's see what happens when this gate agent realizes who he's really dealing with. 16-year-old Jasmine Washington had been counting down the days to this trip for months. An honors student at Roosevelt High with a perfect 4.0 GPA, she had dreams bigger than the sky itself. Every night before bed, she would gaze at the model planes hanging from her ceiling, imagining herself in the cockpit just like her mother. Aviation wasn't just a passing interest for Jasmine, it was in her blood. This morning, she woke up 2 hours before her alarm, too excited to sleep. Today marked her first solo flight, and not just in economy like she was used to, but in first class. The special ticket had been a surprise from her mother, Captain Olivia Washington, one of only 37 black female pilots at Atlantic Airways. "Mom, are you sure?" Jasmine had asked when she received the envelope containing the ticket last week. "First class is so expensive." Olivia had smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Baby girl, you deserve this. You're about to visit Westfield Aeronautical University, the same school that gave me my wings. This isn't just any trip, this is your future taking flight." Jasmine ran her fingers over the embossed Atlantic Airways logo on the ticket. She had watched her mother fight for her position for years. Despite having more flight hours and certifications than most of her colleagues, Olivia had been passed over for promotions multiple times. Jasmine had witnessed her mother come home, shoulders heavy with exhaustion after being, randomly, selected for additional evaluations that her white counterparts never seemed to face. Yet Captain Washington never let bitterness overtake her passion for flying. "When you're in the sky," she would tell Jasmine, "the clouds don't care about your skin color. They part for anyone brave enough to soar through them." Their relationship was unusually close for a mother and teenage daughter. Perhaps it was because they only had each other since Jasmine's father passed away from cancer when she was just 7. Or maybe it was because they shared the same dream, the same determination to break barriers in an industry that wasn't designed for people who looked like them. That morning, as Olivia drove Jasmine to the airport in her uniform, they sang along to Beyoncé, their voices filling the car with joy and anticipation. This would be the first time they'd be apart for more than a day since Jasmine was born. Olivia had arranged her flight schedule to pilot the return journey in 3 days, after Jasmine had toured Westfield and met with Professor James Thompson, Olivia's former mentor and the first black department chair at the university. "You'll love Professor Thompson," Olivia said as they pulled up to the departures terminal. "He saw something in me when no one else did. Called me the future of aviation when others couldn't see past my gender and skin color." Jasmine nodded, suddenly feeling a flutter of nerves. "What if I don't impress him?" Olivia put the car in park and turned to her daughter. "Jasmine Alexandria Washington, you've been impressing people your whole life without even trying. Just be yourself." Before Jasmine stepped out of the car, Olivia pulled something from her pocket, a small gold pin in the shape of wings. "This was given to me by the first black female commercial pilot I ever met. I've worn it on every significant flight of my career. Today, it's yours." Jasmine's eyes widened as her mother pinned it to her jacket. The weight of its history and meaning wasn't lost on her. "Remember," Olivia said, "no matter what happens, you belong in any space you enter. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." It wasn't an idle warning. Just last month, they had been shopping at Livingston's, an upscale department store downtown, when a security guard had followed them through every aisle. When Olivia had confronted him, he claimed it was routine surveillance, despite the fact that he wasn't tailing any of the white shoppers. And then there was the incident at La Maison, the fancy French restaurant where they'd gone to celebrate Olivia's promotion. The hostess had tried to seat them near the kitchen despite their reservation specifying a window table. When Olivia pointed this out, the hostess had responded with, "I thought you might be more comfortable there," as if proximity to the swinging doors and dish noise was somehow preferable for them. These incidents were nothing new. Jasmine had grown up watching her mother navigate these microaggressions with a grace that seemed superhuman. "It's not about never getting knocked down," Olivia would say. "It's about how you rise." Now, standing at the airport drop-off, Jasmine hugged her mother tightly. "I'll make you proud," she whispered. "You already do," Olivia replied. "Every single day." With her backpack over one shoulder and her small carry-on suitcase in hand, Jasmine walked into the terminal. She breezed through security, the special first-class lane allowing her to skip the longer lines. Even there, she noticed a few double takes from TSA agents as she presented her boarding pass, but she held her head high, remembering her mother's words. By the time she reached the gate area, boarding had already begun. She stopped at a bookstore to grab a copy of Women in Flight, Breaking Barriers in Aviation, a book that featured a chapter on her mother. Then she headed to the first-class boarding line, excitement bubbling up inside her. For once, she wouldn't be squeezed into a middle seat or struggling to find overhead space. Today, she would experience what her mother had worked so hard to provide. The first-class line was short, populated by businessmen in expensive suits and a few well-dressed older women. Jasmine, in her jeans, sneakers, and Washington Nationals baseball cap, stood out. But she didn't care. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, ticket in hand, ready for her journey to begin. With a confident stride, she approached the gate, unaware that her dream ticket was about to become a nightmare. Bradley Reynolds had been working as a gate agent for Atlantic Airways for 20 years. At 52, he prided himself on his ability to spot trouble before it happened. He called it his sixth sense, that intuitive feeling when something wasn't right. In truth, his instincts were less about genuine insight and more about deeply ingrained biases he refused to acknowledge. When Bradley saw Jasmine approaching the first-class line, alarm bells immediately rang in his head. A black teenager in casual clothes with a first-class ticket? Something had to be wrong. In his 2 decades of service, he had developed certain expectations about who belonged in the premium cabin, and Jasmine didn't fit the profile he had constructed in his mind. "Boarding pass, please," he said, his tone already laced with suspicion as Jasmine handed over her ticket with a smile. Bradley studied the boarding pass with exaggerated scrutiny, turning it over in his hands as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. His eyes narrowed as he looked from the pass to Jasmine and back again. "This is a first-class ticket," he stated flatly. "Yes, sir," Jasmine replied, her excitement momentarily dampened by his tone. "My mom got it for me." "Your mom," Bradley repeated, doubt evident in his voice. "And how exactly did your mom afford a first-class ticket?" The question hung in the air, loaded with assumptions. The businessman behind Jasmine shifted uncomfortably, while an older woman a few places back in line raised her eyebrows. A few passengers had started to take notice of the exchange, their curious glances adding to Jasmine's growing discomfort. "She's a pilot for Atlantic Airways," Jasmine explained, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Captain Olivia Washington." Bradley snorted, not even attempting to hide his disbelief. "Right. And I'm the CEO." He tapped something into his computer terminal. "There's no Captain Washington flying this route today." "She's not flying this plane," Jasmine clarified, her cheeks beginning to burn. "She's a captain for Atlantic, but she's flying a different route. She gave me her employee family benefit ticket." Bradley's expression hardened. "Look, young lady, I've been doing this job since before you were born. I know every pilot on this route, and I know what an employee benefit ticket looks like. This isn't it." By now, several passengers had stopped to watch the interaction. Someone had taken out their phone and was recording. Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs as she felt the weight of their stares. I'm telling the truth, she insisted, her voice cracking slightly. My mom is Captain Olivia Washington. You can check the employee directory. Do you know how many people try to scam their way into first class every day? Bradley countered, his voice rising. Employee family tickets have a specific code, and yours doesn't have it. This ticket is invalid. A lump formed in Jasmine's throat as she remembered her mother showing her the special booking process she'd used. There had been a specific reservation code, but Olivia had assured her everything was properly entered into the system. There must be some mistake, Jasmine said, trying to keep her voice from trembling. Can you please double-check? I don't need to double-check, Bradley replied dismissively. I know a fake when I see one. The word fake hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she became acutely aware of the spectacle unfolding around her. A middle-aged woman with a pearl necklace whispered something to her husband. A young man in a business suit was openly staring now, his expression a mix of curiosity and discomfort. My mother is a captain, Jasmine repeated, her voice barely above a whisper now. She's been flying for Atlantic for 15 years. Bradley's patience had visibly worn thin. Listen, you can either go back to the regular boarding line where you belong, or I can call security. Your choice. The memory of a similar incident flashed through Jasmine's mind. She was 12, shopping at a boutique with her mother, when the store clerk had accused her of stealing a bracelet she'd been trying on. The humiliation had been overwhelming then, but her mother had been there to defend her, to shield her from the worst of it. Now she stood alone, exposed and vulnerable. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her phone, desperately scrolling through her photos to find one of her mother in uniform. Look, this is her, she said, holding up a picture of Olivia in her captain's hat, for stripes gleaming on her shoulders. Bradley barely glanced at it. Anyone can find a picture online. For all I know, you downloaded that from some website. A security officer had begun making his way over, alerted by Bradley's increasingly loud tone. Jasmine felt as if the floor were tilting beneath her feet. The room seemed to spin, faces blurring around her as tears threatened to spill over. Please, she whispered, just call her. I can give you her number. I'm not calling anyone, Bradley said firmly. Either you move aside and let legitimate passengers board, or I'll have security escort you away from the gate. The security officer, a tall man with a buzz cut and impassive expression, now stood directly behind Bradley. Is there a problem here? He asked, his hand resting casually on his belt. Jasmine's chest tightened. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not when everything was supposed to be perfect. With trembling fingers, she opened her messaging app and typed a desperate text to her mother, Mom, they won't let me on the plane. The gate agent says my ticket is fake. He's calling security. Please help. As she hit send, she looked up to see Bradley gesturing to the security officer, pointing at her as if she were a criminal. The tears she'd been fighting back finally spilled onto her cheeks, hot and humiliating, as the security officer took a step toward her. In that moment, Jasmine Washington felt smaller than she ever had before. Captain Olivia Washington checked her flight plan one last time in the pilot's lounge of Terminal C. Her Boeing 737 was scheduled to depart for Chicago in 90 minutes, giving her just enough time to ensure her daughter was safely on her way to Westfield before beginning her own pre-flight procedures. Everything was going according to plan until her phone vibrated with a message notification. The text from Jasmine made her blood run cold. Olivia immediately tried calling her daughter, but the call went straight to voicemail. Without hesitation, she grabbed her cap and flight bag, informed her first officer she had an emergency, and rushed out of the lounge. Terminal A was on the opposite side of the airport from where Olivia was stationed. She moved as quickly as she could through the crowded corridors, her captain's uniform usually commanding respect and clear passage. Today, however, it seemed to make her invisible in all the wrong ways. Excuse me, I need to get through, she said to a group of airport staff blocking her path near a service elevator. They barely glanced at her before one replied, "This area is for authorized personnel only." Olivia pointed to the 4 stripes on her shoulder. "I'm Captain Washington with Atlantic Airways. This is an emergency involving my daughter." The staff members exchanged skeptical glances before reluctantly stepping aside. As she hurried on, Olivia couldn't help but think about how often her uniform, a symbol of authority and expertise, failed to shield her from the same prejudices that followed her outside the airport. Her mind flashed back to her first day at flight school, 20 years ago. She had arrived early, eager to begin training, only to be directed to the flight attendant program 3 separate times before someone finally believed she was there to become a pilot. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" they had asked, doubt written across their faces. Then there was the passenger who had refused to board when he saw her in the cockpit during pre-boarding. "I'm not trusting my life to an affirmative action hire," he had declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. Her captain at the time, a white man named Robert, had defended her, but the sting of those words had never fully faded. As she rushed through the terminal, dodging rolling suitcases and distracted travelers, Olivia thought about the countless times she'd had to prove herself. The extra simulator hours she'd logged to ensure her skills were beyond reproach. The comments about her hair, her voice, her very presence in spaces traditionally dominated by white men. The constant pressure to be not just good, but exceptional. Even after becoming one of the youngest captains in the airline's history, the scrutiny hadn't stopped. Just last month, a passenger had complimented her after a particularly smooth landing, only to add, "You fly pretty well for a woman." Olivia had smiled tightly and thanked him, swallowing the retort that burned on her tongue. What message do you think these experiences send to aspiring black pilots? Comment number 1 if you think Captain Washington should have spoken up more directly to these microaggressions, or number 2 if you believe her focus on excellence was the right approach. Don't forget to hit that like button if you admire her determination, and subscribe to see more stories of resilience in the face of discrimination. How many more barriers will Olivia need to break before she's truly respected? Let's continue to find out. Now, as she raced to reach her daughter, all those experiences fueled her determination. Jasmine would not face this alone. Not today. Not ever. Olivia had always known her daughter would encounter discrimination, it was an unavoidable reality of their existence, but she had hoped to shield her from the worst of it for as long as possible. She had taught Jasmine to hold her head high, to know her worth, to understand that others' prejudice was a reflection of their limitations, not hers. But no amount of preparation could fully armor a 16-year-old against the kind of public humiliation Jasmine was likely experiencing right now. When she finally reached Terminal A, Olivia was out of breath but focused. She scanned the crowd at Gate A23, quickly spotting her daughter standing at the first-class boarding lane. The sight made her heart clench. Jasmine's shoulders were hunched, her head bowed, tears evident even from a distance. A security officer hovered nearby, and the gate agent, a middle-aged white man with thinning hair and a self-important expression, was gesturing emphatically. As Olivia approached, she caught fragments of the conversation. The gate agent was speaking loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Can't just show up with a fake ticket and expect, I've told you, my mom is a captain for this airline," Jasmine was saying, her voice small but insistent. "And I've told you that I'm not buying it," the agent replied, his tone dripping with condescension. Olivia watched as her daughter, her brilliant, determined, kind-hearted daughter who had never given her a moment's trouble, was treated like a criminal for simply existing in a space someone had decided she didn't belong. The scene was so familiar it made her chest ache. How many times had she herself been questioned, second-guessed, overlooked? She straightened her uniform jacket and adjusted her cap. Then, with the same steady confidence she brought to the cockpit during turbulence, Captain Olivia Washington strode toward the gate. The security officer noticed her first, his eyes flickering to her uniform before returning to Jasmine. The other passengers in line had formed a small semicircle around the scene, some openly staring, others pretending not to watch while stealing glances. A few had phones out, recording the confrontation. Jasmine hadn't seen her yet, still fumbling with her phone, likely trying to find some proof of her mother's employment. The gate agent, whose name tag read Bradley, was impatiently tapping his fingers on the counter, clearly ready to have Jasmine removed. As Olivia drew closer, she expected Bradley to notice her uniform, to make the connection between the captain approaching his gate and the teenager he was harassing. Instead, without even looking up from his computer, he held up a hand in her direction. "You'll need to wait your turn," he said dismissively. "I'm dealing with a situation here." And in that moment, despite her uniform, despite her rank, despite her 15 years of service to Atlantic Airways, Captain Olivia Washington was just another invisible black woman to him. "I believe the situation you're dealing with concerns my daughter," Olivia said, her voice steady but firm, the same tone she used when guiding her crew through unexpected turbulence. Bradley Reynolds finally looked up, his expression transitioning from annoyance to confusion as he registered her uniform, then to shock as his eyes darted between Olivia and Jasmine, noting their identical high cheekbones and determined set of their jaws. "Mom!" Jasmine's voice broke with relief as she rushed to Olivia's side. Bradley's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. You're a captain." "Captain Olivia Washington," she confirmed, placing a protective arm around Jasmine's shoulders. 15 years with Atlantic Airways, currently based out of this terminal. "Now, would you mind explaining why you're accusing my daughter of fraud and threatening her with security?" The passengers who had been watching the scene unfold let out a collective gasp. Someone whispered, "Oh shit," while another muttered, "He's in trouble now." The security officer took a small step back, suddenly finding great interest in a spot on the floor. Bradley's face had turned an alarming shade of red. There must have been some misunderstanding," he stammered. "The ticket didn't have the proper employee family code, and when she mentioned her mother was a captain, I didn't see any Captain Washington on today's flight manifest, because I'm flying to Chicago in an hour, not to Boston on this flight," Olivia interrupted. "And the ticket has the proper code. I booked it myself through our employee portal." She held out her hand, and Jasmine placed her boarding pass in it. Olivia examined it briefly before pointing to a string of characters in the corner. "This is the Employee Family Benefit Code, Mr. Reynolds. It's valid, as you would have known if you'd bothered to verify it in the system instead of making assumptions based on what my daughter looks like." Bradley's expression shifted to defensive indignation. "I was just following protocol. We've had issues with fraudulent tickets recently, and I was." "Were you following protocol when you called my daughter a liar to her face?" Olivia asked, her calm voice belying the anger simmering beneath. "Or when you threatened to have security remove her without making a single phone call to verify her identity? Because I don't recall that being part of Atlantic Airways customer service guidelines." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Phones were out, recording the confrontation. Bradley seemed to suddenly realize he had an audience, and his demeanor shifted to one of placating insincerity. "Captain Washington, I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. Of course your daughter is welcome to board in first class." He reached for the boarding pass, but Olivia didn't release it. "This isn't about boarding now," she said. "This is about how you treated a legitimate passenger with a valid ticket. This is about the assumptions you made based solely on her appearance." Bradley's smile became strained. "I assure you, this had nothing to do with," "Choose your next words very carefully, Mr. Reynolds," Olivia warned, her voice lowered but no less intense. A man in a suit approached, his Atlantic Airways management badge identifying him as Marcus Daniels, terminal supervisor. His face was a carefully constructed mask of concern as he inserted himself into the situation. "Captain Washington, I was informed there's an issue at the gate. How can I help resolve this?" His tone suggested he viewed this as a minor inconvenience rather than the significant incident it was. "Your gate agent accused my daughter of presenting a fraudulent ticket, refused to verify her identity when she explained I'm an Atlantic Airways captain, and was about to have security remove her from the gate, all without making a single phone call to confirm her story, Olivia explained, maintaining her professional composure. "I'd call that more than an issue, Mr. Daniels." Marcus glanced at Bradley, then at the gathered crowd, clearly assessing the public relations damage. "I understand your frustration, Captain. Please accept our sincere apologies for this unfortunate misunderstanding. I can assure you Mr. Reynolds meant no harm." "Intentions don't negate impact," Olivia replied. "And this is far from the first misunderstanding I've witnessed or experienced at this airline." Jasmine stood quietly beside her mother, still visibly shaken but drawing strength from Olivia's unwavering presence. The security officer had completely backed away now, pretending to be engaged with his radio. Marcus lowered his voice. "Captain Washington, we value your service to Atlantic Airways. I'm sure we can handle this matter discreetly. Perhaps we could discuss this in my office after your daughter boards." The suggestion that this should be swept under the rug, handled discreetly, as if Jasmine's humiliation was a minor inconvenience to be managed rather than addressed, only fueled Olivia's resolve. "No, Mr. Daniels, we will not be handling this discreetly," she replied, her voice carrying just enough for the onlookers to hear. "My daughter deserves a public apology at minimum, and I expect a full investigation into Mr. Reynolds' conduct today." Bradley, sensing the gravity of his situation, finally offered what passed for an apology. "I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding, Miss Washington. We deal with many situations at this gate, and I was only trying to maintain the integrity of our boarding process." The non-apology hung in the air, hollow and insufficient. Olivia fixed him with a steady gaze. "That's not an apology, Mr. Reynolds. That's a justification." Marcus stepped in again, his smile tight. "Let's not delay the flight any further. I'll personally escort Miss Washington to her seat, and we can address this matter through the proper channels afterward. The aircraft needs to depart on schedule." Olivia checked her watch. She had 45 minutes before she needed to be at her own gate for pre-flight preparations. Enough time to ensure Jasmine was safely on board and to make it crystal clear that this incident would not be forgotten once the plane pushed back from the gate. "Jasmine will board now," she agreed, "but don't mistake this for the end of the matter. I expect a formal investigation, and I will be following up directly with airline leadership." She turned to her daughter, softening her voice. "Are you okay to fly? I can arrange for you to take a later flight if you'd prefer." Jasmine straightened her shoulders, the Washington family resilience evident in her posture. "I'm okay, Mom. I want to go to Westfield as planned." Olivia nodded, pride mixing with lingering anger. She handed the boarding pass back to her daughter and watched as Marcus personally scanned it, the machine beeping its approval with a sound that seemed to underscore the absurdity of the entire situation. Before Jasmine walked down the jetway, Olivia pulled her into a tight embrace. "Remember what I told you," she whispered. "You belong in any space you enter." Jasmine nodded against her shoulder. "I know, Mom. I'll see you in Boston." As her daughter disappeared down the jetway, Captain Washington turned back to Bradley and Marcus, her expression making it clear that while this chapter might be closing, the story was far from over. Zoe Chen had been standing 3 people behind Jasmine in the first-class line when the confrontation began. A social media manager for a tech company, she had an instinct for identifying moments that would resonate online. The second she heard the gate agent questioning the black teenager about her ticket, Zoe's phone was out and recording. "This is going to blow up," she murmured to herself as she captured the tearful girl trying to explain that her mother was a pilot, the dismissive agent calling security, and then, in a twist worthy of a movie, the mother appearing in full captain's uniform to defend her daughter. By the time Jasmine boarded the plane and Captain Washington left to prepare for her own flight, Zoe had already edited the 6-minute video down to a punchy 90 seconds, complete with captions highlighting the most egregious exchanges. She posted it to her TikTok and Twitter accounts with the caption, "Watch this black teen get accused of having a fake first-class ticket, until her mom shows up in a captain's uniform." Hashtag flying while black, hashtag Atlantic Airways, hashtag racism. As Jasmine settled into her first-class seat, she was unaware that her humiliation was already spreading across the internet at breakneck speed. The cabin crew, however, had been informed of the incident by the lead flight attendant, who had received a call from the gate. "Are you Jasmine?" asked a flight attendant named Kevin, approaching her seat with a sympathetic smile. "I'm so sorry about what happened at the gate. Can I get you anything before we take off? Water? Juice?" Jasmine managed a small smile, grateful for his kindness. "Water would be nice, thank you." Another flight attendant, an older woman named Patricia, gave Jasmine a wide berth, avoiding eye contact altogether. It was clear that news of the incident had created a divide among the crew, those who empathized with Jasmine and those who felt uncomfortable or perhaps even aligned with Bradley's actions. As the plane taxied down the runway, Jasmine gazed out the window, trying to focus on the excitement of visiting Westfield rather than the knot of humiliation still tight in her stomach. She thought about her mother's calm confidence in the face of Bradley's disrespect. Would she ever possess that same poise? That ability to stand firm without losing control? When the plane reached cruising altitude, Jasmine connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi to let her mother know she was okay. That's when she saw the notifications flooding her social media accounts. Friends from school, distant relatives, even strangers were tagging her in a video that appeared to be going viral. With trembling fingers, she tapped on one of the links and watched the condensed version of her humiliation play out on screen. The footage had been captured from an angle that clearly showed both her distress and Bradley's dismissive attitude. The moment when her mother appeared, resplendent in her uniform, had been emphasized with a dramatic slow-motion effect and caption, "Plot twist, Mom is a captain." The video already had over 50,000 views and was climbing rapidly. The comments section was flooded with outrage. "This gate agent needs to be fired." The look on his face when he realized who her mom was. Priceless. This is what black people deal with every day. Atlantic Airways better make this right. Jasmine didn't know whether to feel validated or mortified. On one hand, people were acknowledging the injustice of what had happened. On the other, her most vulnerable moment was now being consumed as entertainment by thousands of strangers. A text from her mother lit up her screen. "Just saw the video going around. Are you okay? We'll get through this together. I love you." Before Jasmine could reply, Kevin returned with a message from the captain. "The pilot would like you to know that you're welcome to visit the cockpit after we land if you'd like. He said he's a friend of your mother's." For the first time since the incident, Jasmine felt a small spark of joy. "I'd like that," she said. Meanwhile, in another corner of the internet, the hashtags #CaptainsMatter2 and #FlyingWhileBlack were trending. The video had been picked up by several news outlets, which were reaching out to Atlantic Airways for comment. The airline's social media team was in crisis mode, monitoring mentions and scrambling to draft a response. By the time Jasmine's plane touched down in Boston 3 hours later, the video had amassed over 1 million views across platforms. As passengers deplaned, several gave her supportive nods or whispered words of encouragement, having recognized her from the viral footage that had made its way through the cabin during the flight. Professor James Thompson was waiting for her at arrivals, his tall frame easy to spot in the crowd. Olivia had called ahead to inform him of the incident, and his kind face was creased with concern as he greeted her. "Jasmine Washington," he said warmly, enveloping her in a grandfatherly hug. "Your mother has told me so much about you. I'm sorry your journey here was marred by such an unpleasant experience." "Thank you for meeting me, Professor Thompson," Jasmine replied, trying to summon some enthusiasm for the visit she had been looking forward to for months. As they walked to his car, Thompson's phone buzzed with a news alert. He glanced at it and shook his head. "Looks like your experience has sparked quite the conversation. NBC just picked up the story." Jasmine's stomach tightened. "I never wanted to be the center of attention like this." Thompson placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Sometimes the moments that define us are the ones we never asked for. Your mother didn't ask to be one of the few black female captains in commercial aviation, but her presence in that cockpit has changed the industry for the better. Perhaps this incident, difficult as it is, will create change too. As they drove toward Westfield, Jasmine's phone continued to light up with notifications. Friends expressing outrage. Relatives offering support. Strangers sharing their own stories of discrimination. The incident was no longer just about her, it had become a catalyst for a larger conversation about who belongs in which spaces and why. Back at Atlantic Airways headquarters, the public relations team was in full damage control mode. The video had been viewed by executives who were now demanding answers. Words like lawsuit, discrimination, and public relations disaster echoed through emergency meetings. And somewhere over the Midwest, Captain Olivia Washington piloted her Boeing 737 with the same steady hand she always had, unaware that her daughter's humiliation, and her own dignified response, was about to change both their lives in ways they never could have anticipated. Atlantic Airways is aware of the incident that occurred at Gate A23 and is conducting a thorough investigation. We are committed to providing excellent service to all our passengers and take these allegations seriously. This appears to be an isolated incident that does not reflect our company values. Richard Winters, Vice President of Communications at Atlantic Airways, reviewed the statement one last time before approving its release to the media. With 20 years of crisis management experience, he prided himself on crafting responses that sounded concerned without admitting fault. This situation, however, was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. The video has reached 5 million views, his assistant informed him, refreshing the social media dashboard on her tablet. CNN and MSNBC have both picked it up for their evening broadcasts. Richard pinched the bridge of his nose. What about the captain? Has anyone spoken with her yet? She landed in Chicago an hour ago. HR has scheduled a call with her for this evening. When Captain Washington's phone rang in her hotel room, she was reviewing flight plans for her return journey the following day. The caller ID showed Atlantic Airways corporate office. Captain Washington speaking, she answered, her voice professional despite her simmering anger. Captain, this is Amanda from Human Resources. I have Richard Winters, VP of Communications, and Thomas Parker from Legal on the line with me. Olivia straightened, recognizing the formation of a damage control squad when she heard one. I'm listening. Richard's voice came through, smooth and practiced. Captain Washington, first and foremost, we want to express our sincere regrets regarding the incident involving your daughter today. That's not how we want any passenger to be treated, especially family of our valued pilots. Olivia noted the careful phrasing. Regrets rather than apologies, the emphasis on her being a valued pilot, rather than addressing the clear discrimination at play. I appreciate the call, she replied evenly. However, I'm more interested in hearing about concrete actions the airline plans to take in response. There was a pause before Richard continued. We're conducting a full investigation into the matter. In the meantime, we'd like to offer you and your daughter vouchers for future flights as a gesture of goodwill. The implication was clear, accept the vouchers, let us handle this internally, move on. It was the same playbook she'd seen used countless times when passengers of color raised concerns about discriminatory treatment. Mr. Winters, Olivia said, her tone cooling several degrees, my daughter was publicly humiliated, accused of fraud, and nearly removed by security for the crime of being a young black woman with a first-class ticket. Vouchers aren't going to address the systemic issues that allowed this to happen. Thomas from Legal cleared his throat. Captain Washington, we understand your frustration. However, we'd caution against making allegations of systemic issues without evidence. Our records show no pattern of similar incidents. Olivia almost laughed. No pattern? Have you spoken to Valencia Brown in your flight attendant corps? Or Michael Jenkins in ground operations? Or any of the other black employees who filed complaints only to have them dismissed as misunderstandings? Ever had your legitimate concerns dismissed as isolated incidents? Comment number 1 if you think Atlantic Airways is genuinely unaware of discrimination problems, or number 2 if you believe they're deliberately downplaying a pattern. Hit that like button if you're standing with Captain Washington in her fight for accountability, and subscribe to see how this confrontation unfolds. Will the airline recognize their responsibility, or will they continue offering empty gestures instead of real change? The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. I thought so, Olivia continued. Now, here's what's going to happen. I expect a formal, public apology to my daughter. I expect Bradley Reynolds to be held accountable for his actions. And I expect Atlantic Airways to take a hard look at its training and protocols to address the biases that led to this incident. Richard's voice returned, tense but maintaining its professional veneer. Captain, we understand your position. However, making this a public matter might not be in anyone's best interest. These situations are complex, and these situations are only complex when companies want to avoid accountability, Olivia interrupted. My daughter's humiliation is already public, over 5 million views last I checked. What isn't public is Atlantic Airways' commitment to making sure it never happens again. As the call continued, Jasmine was touring Westfield Aeronautical University with Professor Thompson. What should have been an exciting glimpse into her future was overshadowed by the morning's events and the ongoing virality of the video. This is our advanced simulator lab, Thompson was saying, showing her a room filled with flight simulators. Your mother spent countless hours in here, determined to be the best pilot in her class. Jasmine nodded, trying to focus. Did people ever question whether she belonged here? Thompson's expression softened. Every day. There were instructors who graded her more harshly, students who refused to partner with her, administrators who suggested she might be more comfortable in a different program. How did she handle it? Jasmine asked, thinking of her mother's composed confrontation with Bradley. She outperformed everyone so dramatically they couldn't ignore her talent, Thompson replied. But it took a toll. No one should have to be exceptional just to be treated with basic dignity. His words resonated with a conversation Olivia had had with Jasmine years ago, when a teacher had suggested Jasmine wasn't really doing her own math homework because her solutions were too advanced. Success doesn't shield you from racism, Olivia had told her then. Sometimes it just changes how it manifests. People will question your achievements, suggest you had advantages rather than overcoming disadvantages. You'll work twice as hard to get half as far, and when you arrive, they'll say you had help. Now, standing in the simulator lab where her mother had trained, Jasmine felt the weight of that legacy, the pressure to be exceptional, the additional burden of representing not just herself but everyone who looked like her. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, just got off a call with airline execs. They offered flight vouchers as compensation. I declined. This isn't about free tickets. It's about dignity and respect. How are you holding up? As Jasmine typed her reply, her social media notifications continued to explode. The Black Pilots Association had shared the video, adding context about the dismal statistics regarding black pilots in commercial aviation. Less than 3% of all commercial pilots were black, and less than 1% were black women. Meanwhile, Valencia Brown, a senior flight attendant who had worked with Olivia for years, was organizing a response among the airline's black employees. Text messages and emails circulated, collecting testimonials about similar experiences. The incident with Jasmine had become a catalyst, bringing to the surface years of accumulated grievances and unchallenged biases. Back in her hotel room, Olivia reviewed these messages with a mix of validation and sadness. The stories were all too familiar: black flight attendants being mistaken for cleaning staff, black pilots being questioned by passengers about their qualifications, black ground crew facing random security checks at rates far higher than their white counterparts. She had a choice to make. She could accept the airline's attempts to minimize the situation, take their vouchers, and move on. It would be easier, certainly. Less risky for her career. Or she could use this moment. Painful as it was for Jasmine, to push for the kind of systemic change that might ensure other black travelers wouldn't face the same humiliation. As she pondered her next move, her phone lit up with a notification. Bradley Reynolds and Marcus Daniels had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. It was a start, but nowhere near enough. Captain Olivia Washington made her decision. This wouldn't be swept under the rug with vouchers and vague promises. Not this time. The conference room on the 15th floor of Atlantic Airways headquarters fell silent as Captain Olivia Washington spread printouts across the mahogany table. Each page contained screenshots of texts, emails, and social media posts documenting incidents of discrimination experienced by black employees and passengers of the airline. "This is not an isolated incident," Olivia stated, her voice measured but firm. "This is a pattern that has been ignored for far too long." Seated across from her were CEO Trevor Phillips, Richard Winters from Communications, Amanda from HR, and 3 members of the board of directors. The emergency meeting had been called after Olivia had emailed a detailed report to senior leadership, along with a clear message: address these issues substantively, or she would go public with everything. Trevor Phillips leaned forward, his expression guarded. "Captain Washington, we appreciate you bringing these concerns to our attention. But I'm troubled by what appears to be an ultimatum." "I prefer to think of it as an opportunity," Olivia replied. "An opportunity for Atlantic Airways to lead the industry in addressing the biases that affect both employees and passengers of color." Richard Winters, ever the PR strategist, interjected. "We've already placed the gate agent and supervisor on administrative leave. We've issued a public statement expressing regret about your daughter's experience. What more are you looking for?" Olivia met his gaze steadily. "Administrative leave is not accountability. A statement expressing regret is not a commitment to change. I'm looking for meaningful action that addresses the root causes, not just the symptoms." She outlined her demands. Mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, revisions to security protocols to prevent racial profiling, establishment of a diversity and inclusion task force with actual decision-making power, and clear consequences for employees who engaged in discriminatory behavior. Additionally, she continued, "I want a formal, unequivocal apology to my daughter, not for a misunderstanding, but for the discrimination she experienced." One of the board members, an older white man named George Hoffman, shook his head. "Captain Washington, while we respect your service to this airline, these demands seem excessive for what was essentially a customer service hiccup." Before Olivia could respond, the conference room door opened. Captain James Thompson, Olivia's mentor and now a senior training captain, entered, followed by Valencia Brown, the senior flight attendant who had been collecting testimonials from other black employees. "Sorry we're late," Thompson said, taking a seat beside Olivia. "Traffic was terrible." Trevor Phillips frowned. "I wasn't aware this meeting included additional participants." "I invited them," Olivia explained. "Captain Thompson has been with this airline for 30 years and has witnessed the evolution, or lack thereof, of our approach to diversity. Valencia has been collecting experiences from other employees of color that support everything I've presented." Valencia placed a thick folder on the table. 173 incidents documented over the past 5 years, all reported through proper channels, all either dismissed or addressed with additional training that never materialized. The room fell silent again as the executives exchanged uneasy glances. Meanwhile, Jasmine was finding her voice in her own way. During her scheduled presentation to Westfield's Aeronautical Engineering Department, she decided to address the incident head-on. "My original presentation was going to focus on the aerodynamic innovations I've been researching," she began, addressing the room of professors and students. "But recent events have highlighted another type of barrier in aviation, one that has nothing to do with air resistance and everything to do with resistance to change." She recounted her experience at the gate, speaking with a poise that belied her 16 years. "What happened to me wasn't about a ticket code or a security protocol. It was about who gets to occupy certain spaces without having their presence questioned. As Jasmine spoke, video of her presentation was being live-streamed on Westfield's social media channels, adding fuel to the already blazing online conversation about the incident. Back at Atlantic Airways headquarters, the meeting had evolved into a tense negotiation. CEO Trevor Phillips, while initially defensive, was beginning to recognize the potential damage to the airline's reputation if they didn't address the situation properly. "What exactly are you proposing, Captain Washington?" he asked finally. "I've outlined it in the document before you," Olivia replied. "But let me be clear about what happens if these changes aren't implemented. I have 15 years of documented incidents. I have testimonials from dozens of employees. I have statistics showing the disproportionate rate at which passengers of color are questioned, searched, or removed from flights. And now I have a viral video that has put a human face on all of it." The implication was clear. If Atlantic Airways didn't take meaningful action, all of this would become public in a way that no PR strategy could contain. Valencia added, "This isn't just coming from Captain Washington. There are many of us ready to speak out if necessary." Richard Winters, always calculating the public relations angle, looked genuinely alarmed. "Trevor, we need to consider this carefully. The video already has over 10 million views. If this escalates further, it's not about the views," Olivia interrupted. "It's about doing what's right. It's about my daughter being able to board a plane without being humiliated. It's about every black passenger and employee being treated with the same respect automatically afforded to others." Thompson, who had remained quiet until now, addressed the CEO directly. "Trevor, I've known you for 20 years. You've always prided yourself on running an airline that values integrity. This is a moment to demonstrate that integrity, not just talk about it in mission statements." As the discussion continued, Bradley Reynolds and supervisor Marcus Daniels received notifications that they had been placed on indefinite administrative leave. The initial internal investigation had revealed that Bradley had indeed bypassed standard verification procedures when questioning Jasmine's ticket, procedures that would have immediately confirmed its validity. Online, the conversation was evolving. What had started as outrage over one teen's treatment had expanded into a broader examination of discrimination in air travel. Journalists were digging into statistics, finding that passengers of color were significantly more likely to be questioned about their tickets, selected for additional screening, or removed from flights for minor infractions. The pressure on Atlantic Airways was mounting from all sides. Other airlines were taking notice too, quietly reviewing their own policies to avoid becoming the next viral example of discrimination in the industry. By the end of the 4-hour meeting, CEO Trevor Phillips had reluctantly agreed to consider Olivia's proposals. It wasn't the immediate commitment she had hoped for, but it was a start. The real test would come in the days ahead, as the company either demonstrated genuine willingness to change or revealed that this was just another exercise in damage control. As Olivia left the meeting, her phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine, "Just finished my presentation. Talked about what happened. Standing ovation. Professor Thompson says I'm definitely Westfield material." Despite the weight of the day, Olivia smiled. Her daughter was finding her strength in the midst of adversity. A skill that would serve her well in whatever skies she chose to navigate. "Let's be honest, Captain Washington," CEO Trevor Phillips said, leaning back in his chair during their private meeting 3 days after the viral incident. "While what happened to your daughter was unfortunate, implementing these kinds of sweeping changes would be an overreaction. It sends a message that Atlantic Airways has a systemic problem, which we don't." Olivia had expected this response. After 20 years in aviation, she recognized the instinctive corporate defense mechanism: deny, deflect, diminish. She'd seen it countless times, from the earliest days of her career when her flight instructor had dismissed her concerns about gendered language in training materials, to just last year when a first officer had made racially charged jokes in the cockpit and been let off with a warning. "With respect, Mr. Phillips," she replied, sliding a tablet across his desk, "the data suggests otherwise." Trevor frowned as he looked at the screen. Olivia had compiled incident reports from the past 5 years, categorized by race and outcome. The pattern was undeniable. Passengers of color were 6 times more likely to be questioned about their tickets, 8 times more likely to be selected for additional screening, and nearly 10 times more likely to be removed from flights for disruptive behavior that, when exhibited by white passengers, was often overlooked. "Where did you get this data?" Trevor asked, his confident demeanor faltering slightly. "From Atlantic Airways' own reporting system," Olivia explained. Valencia Brown in customer relations helped compile it. "Nothing here is new information, it's just never been presented in aggregate before." As Trevor continued scrolling through the data, the door opened and Valencia entered, followed by 3 other flight attendants, 2 black, 1 Latina, each carrying their own documentation. "These are reports that were filed and subsequently dismissed," Valencia explained, placing a folder on the desk. 47 incidents in the past year alone where passengers of color were subjected to treatment that violated our own customer service guidelines. Trevor's expression hardened. "This feels like an ambush, Captain Washington." "It's not an ambush," Olivia assured him. "It's an awakening. For too long, these issues have been treated as isolated incidents rather than symptoms of a larger problem. My daughter's experience was simply the one that happened to be caught on camera." Meanwhile, across the country at Westfield Aeronautical University, Jasmine was delivering a speech that would ultimately prove as impactful as her mother's methodical presentation of evidence. Standing before a packed auditorium of students, faculty, and local media, Jasmine spoke not just about her humiliation at the gate, but about the broader implications of that moment. "When that gate agent looked at me, he didn't see a future pilot," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He didn't see an honors student with dreams of following in her mother's footsteps. He saw only the color of my skin and decided I didn't belong in first class." The audience was silent, captivated by the poised young woman whose story had resonated with millions online. "But this isn't just about one bad day at the airport," Jasmine continued. "It's about who gets the benefit of the doubt in our society. It's about the extra burden carried by people of color who must constantly prove they belong in spaces others enter without question." Her words were being live-streamed, and clips were already circulating on social media, adding a powerful new dimension to the ongoing conversation. If Olivia's approach was statistical and methodical, Jasmine's was emotional and deeply human. Together, mother and daughter were creating a narrative too compelling to ignore. Back in Trevor's office, the CEO was beginning to realize the full scope of what he was facing. This wasn't going away with a carefully worded statement or a token gesture. The evidence before him, combined with the viral video and Jasmine's emerging role as an eloquent spokesperson for change, presented both a crisis and an opportunity. "What do you want, Captain Washington?" he asked finally, setting the tablet aside. "Really want, beyond the list of demands you've presented?" Olivia considered the question carefully. "I want my daughter to live in a world where her achievements matter more than her appearance. I want her to be able to walk through an airport, or any public space, without having to prove she belongs there. And I want Atlantic Airways to be part of creating that world, not standing in its way." Trevor nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. "Tell me more about these training programs you're proposing." As they delved into the details, passengers from other incidents began coming forward, inspired by Jasmine's courage. A black executive who had been asked to move from first class because a white passenger didn't feel comfortable. A Middle Eastern family removed from a flight when another passenger reported them for suspicious conversation that turned out to be a discussion about dinner plans. An elderly Asian couple relegated to the back of the plane despite having paid for premium seats. Each story added to the mounting evidence that what had happened to Jasmine was not an anomaly but part of a pattern that had been normalized for too long. The airline's internal investigation, initially focused narrowly on Bradley Reynolds and Marcus Daniels, had expanded to examine procedural failures and training gaps that had allowed discriminatory practices to go unchecked. What they found was troubling. implicit bias pervaded many aspects of customer service protocols, from how suspicious behavior was defined to which passengers were flagged for additional verification. By the end of the week, Trevor Phillips found himself in the unusual position of being educated by the very employees he had previously dismissed. Valencia's meticulously documented incidents, combined with Olivia's strategic vision for reform and the public relations nightmare unfolding online, had created a perfect storm that demanded real change. "Your mentor, Captain Thompson, said something to me yesterday that I can't get out of my mind," Trevor admitted during their final meeting. He said, "Sometimes you have to break systems to fix them. I've spent my career building and maintaining systems. The idea of breaking them is uncomfortable. Growth usually is," Olivia replied simply. For Jasmine and Olivia, the past week had been emotionally exhausting. Despite the supportive messages flooding their inboxes, reliving the humiliation through endless news cycles and social media discussions had taken its toll. Yet with each retelling, each interview, each presentation of evidence, their resolve had only strengthened. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They had become the faces of a movement demanding that the skies, and all public spaces, be equally accessible to everyone, regardless of race. As Trevor Phillips finally, reluctantly, conceded that significant changes were indeed necessary, Olivia thought of something her father had told her when she first announced her intention to become a pilot, decades ago when female black pilots were even rarer than they were now. "The hardest part of flying," he had said, "isn't taking off or landing. It's convincing others you have the right to be in the cockpit in the first place." For too long, she and others like her had shouldered that burden alone. Perhaps now, finally, the weight would begin to shift. 6 months after the incident that sparked a nationwide conversation about racial bias in air travel, Jasmine Washington strode confidently through Terminal A of the same airport where she had once stood in tears. She was no longer the shaken teenager who had been publicly humiliated. Today, she walked with purpose, her head held high, wearing the gold wing pin her mother had given her that fateful morning. The first-class check-in agent. A young black woman named Destiny, who had been hired as part of Atlantic Airways' expanded diversity initiative, greeted her with a genuine smile. "Good morning, Ms. Washington. Boston again today?" "Yes," Jasmine replied, returning the smile. "Visiting Westfield for my pilot training orientation." "Congratulations," Destiny said, processing her boarding pass. "You're all set. Have a wonderful flight." No questions about how she could afford first class. No suspicion about the legitimacy of her ticket. Just the respect and courtesy that should have been afforded to her from the beginning. As Jasmine made her way to the security checkpoint, she noticed other changes too. New signage outlined passengers' rights in clear, accessible language. QR codes invited travelers to report any concerns directly to the airline's newly established Office of Passenger Advocacy. Security personnel were more diverse, their interactions with travelers noticeably more consistent regardless of race or appearance. These were the visible manifestations of the transformation that had begun with her humiliation 6 months ago. Behind the scenes, the changes were even more substantial. Bradley Reynolds had been terminated after a comprehensive review revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior that extended far beyond his interaction with Jasmine. Marcus Daniels, the supervisor who had attempted to sweep the incident under the rug, had been demoted and required to complete extensive retraining before returning to a customer-facing role. More significantly, Atlantic Airways had established a Diversity and Inclusion Council with actual decision-making authority, led by none other than Captain Olivia Washington. The council had already implemented mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, revised security protocols to prevent racial profiling, and created accountability systems that tracked and addressed discriminatory incidents. "Mom says the hardest part was getting people to acknowledge there was a problem in the first place," Jasmine explained to Professor Thompson as they walked across Westfield's campus later that day. Once they admitted that, the solutions weren't actually that complicated. Thompson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's often the case with systemic issues. The technical fixes, training programs, policy revisions, accountability measures, those are straightforward. It's the cultural resistance that's difficult to overcome. Jasmine had experienced that resistance firsthand in the weeks following the incident. Even as support poured in, so did backlash. Online trolls had questioned her story, suggested she had somehow provoked the gate agent, or accused her and her mother of playing the race card for attention. Some airline employees had initially resisted the new training requirements, insisting they didn't see color, and therefore didn't need anti-bias education. But the evidence had been too compelling to ignore. The viral video, combined with the mountain of data Olivia and Valencia had compiled, had made it impossible to dismiss what happened as an isolated incident. And as other airlines watched the situation unfold, many had quietly begun examining their own practices, implementing similar changes to avoid becoming the next cautionary tale. For Olivia, the past 6 months had been a whirlwind of activity. In addition to her regular flights, she had taken on the leadership of the Diversity Council, worked with training departments to develop new materials, and consulted with other airlines looking to implement similar reforms. It was exhausting but deeply satisfying work, the kind of systemic change she had been advocating for throughout her career. "Sometimes I think about sending Bradley a thank you note," she joked during a video call with Jasmine the night before. "Without his blatant discrimination, we might still be fighting the subtle kind that's easier to deny." Jasmine laughed, but there was truth in her mother's words. The overtness of Bradley's behavior, captured on video for millions to see, had made it impossible to dismiss or minimize. It had provided the catalyst needed for change that was long overdue. Now, as Jasmine prepared to begin the pilot training program during her school breaks, a special arrangement Westfield had created specifically for her, she reflected on how her worst day had ultimately set her on an accelerated path toward her dreams. The following weekend, Olivia arranged for Jasmine to join her in the cockpit during pre-flight checks on a Boston to Chicago route. As mother and daughter sat side by side in the pilot and co-pilot seats, surrounded by instruments and controls, Olivia felt a swell of emotion. "When I was your age," she said, adjusting the captain's hat that temporarily dwarfed Jasmine's head, "I never saw anyone who looked like me in this seat. Not in real life, not in movies, not in advertisements. I had to imagine myself here without any evidence it was possible." Jasmine ran her fingers over the control panel, familiarizing herself with the layout she had studied so often in books and simulators. "I never had that problem," she said softly. "I always had you." The significance of that simple statement wasn't lost on Olivia. Representation mattered. Visibility mattered. Her presence in the cockpit had made it possible for her daughter to envision herself there too, without having to overcome the additional barrier of believing it was impossible for someone who looked like her. But it went beyond just the two of them. Since the incident, Olivia had received hundreds of messages from young black girls interested in aviation careers. Jasmine had been invited to speak at schools across the country, inspiring students who saw in her story both the reality of discrimination and the possibility of overcoming it. They were changing perceptions one conversation at a time. As they completed the pre-flight checks, Olivia noticed her daughter touching the gold wing pin she still wore every day. "That pin has quite a journey now," Olivia observed. Jasmine nodded. "It reminds me that belonging isn't about permission from others. It's about knowing your own worth." Later that day, as Jasmine walked through O'Hare International Airport wearing her mother's pilot pin, she noticed something remarkable. Gate agents and passengers alike acknowledged her with genuine respect, not because they recognized her from the viral video, but because the culture was slowly shifting. The space she occupied was no longer questioned as automatically as it once had been. Small changes, perhaps, but meaningful ones. And they had ripple effects beyond the world of aviation. Other industries had taken note of Atlantic Airways' transformation, implementing their own reforms to address similar biases. Conversations about who belonged in which spaces had expanded beyond airports to include restaurants, stores, schools, and workplaces. It wasn't perfect, systemic change never happened overnight, but it was progress. Real, measurable progress that had begun with one terrible day and one viral video. The final twist in Jasmine's journey came a week later, when Professor Thompson called with news that left her speechless. Westfield Aeronautical University, impressed by her poise, intelligence, and obvious passion for aviation, had accepted her into their elite pilot training program, making her the youngest black female ever admitted, breaking the record previously held by her mother. "Your experience gave you a perspective that can't be taught in classrooms," Thompson explained. "We need voices like yours in this industry." As Jasmine shared the news with Olivia that evening, both women reflected on the unexpected path that had led them here. What had begun as a humiliating rejection at a gate had transformed into an opportunity to reshape an industry, to open doors for others, to challenge assumptions about who belonged in which seats. "I used to think success meant proving them wrong," Olivia said, embracing her daughter. "Now I realize it's about changing the system so no one has to prove themselves in the first place." Jasmine nodded, understanding completely. Her journey had only just begun, but already she had learned perhaps the most important lesson of all, that true transformation happened not when you fought for your own seat, but when you ensured that seats were accessible to everyone who deserved them. This story reminds us that discrimination often hides behind protocols and procedures that seem neutral but impact people differently based on race. What happened to Jasmine wasn't just about one biased gate agent. It revealed an entire system that normalized questioning black people's presence in premium spaces. The Washington women teach us several powerful lessons: that documentation matters, recording incidents creates undeniable evidence. That collective action amplifies individual voices. When Valencia and others joined Olivia, the airline couldn't ignore them. That institutional change requires both emotional appeals and hard data, and that transformation isn't just about punishment but creating new systems. Perhaps most importantly, they show us that sometimes the most significant impact comes from our worst experiences. Jasmine's humiliation became the catalyst for industry-wide change that will benefit countless travelers who will never know her name but will experience the world she helped create. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination that made you question whether you belonged somewhere? Comment below with your stories or thoughts on how we can create more inclusive spaces. If Jasmine and Olivia's journey inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share this video to help spread awareness about these important issues. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't just proving you belong, but transforming the system for everyone who comes after you.